Muse and poem memoir story. Pollard has also been awarded a fellowship from the Money for Women Barbara Deming Memorial Fund. So, I've given you a handout. I'm trying not to talk directly into this yelling at you, so how's that? Yeah.
Do what you must, my dear.
Do what I must?
Yes.
Give me a microphone, makes it dangerous. So, my talk is tentatively titled Spirit and Formalist Fermentation in African American Poetry. So here we go. I've been thinking lately about variation in form and about what it might mean for African American poets writing sonnets. My questions are inspired by my own work that is evolving and inspired by an earth-centered spiritual perspective. As I write these new poems, I'm often surprised by the sense I have that form and meter, as I anticipated emerging in my work, shifts in response to the kind of spirit-inflected meaning that I'm experimenting with on the page. My initial assertion, then, is that just as it changes the body, even our own very sense of permanence, of reality, spirit breaks form. It inspires us to enter into an improvisational mode, to flirt with play as we move toward enacting transgressions. Form and meter offer us recognizable entree into the world of meaning making. It gives us an opportunity to move past our awareness toward another level of understanding. African American poetic traditions are full of examples of poets past and present who do this kind of work, yet often we don't speak about the nuts and bolts of transcendent poetic world making and reconstructing. I like to take a look at two early 20th century poets, Jean Toomer and Alice Moore of Dunbar Nelson, who actively engaged this dynamic in their work. I want to start by talking about a turn of this 20th century New Orleans regional writer turned local Wilmington, Delaware poet and activist, Alice Moore Dunbar Nelson. As a young writer, she published a mixed genre collection, poetry, short stories, and some essays, entitled Violets and Other Tales, published in 1895. A few years after Violets was published, she was married for several years to Laurence Dunbar, but he died a few years after they divorced, and she went on to marry two more times. I like to look at two of her sonnets, one from Violets and the other much later, written during World War I. As scholars of Dunbar, Moore, and Nelson's work, Gloria Hull were dismissive of her poetry. Basically said it lacked generative power or creative genius. Right? She went so far as to say that at the end of the 20th century that she just felt that Alice Dunbar Nelson's work was not creative work. Her poetry was flat. There was something missing. Anytime I run into that kind of judgmental language, I know there must be something there for me to interrogate further. And in fact, even in recent years, even with the growing resurgence of scholarly interest in her letters, there's a collection at the University of Delaware where all her papers are. There's been critical work published on her short stories, but little attention has been given to her poetry. This is due to several factors. First is her marriage to Laurence Dunbar, as sort of the second, and if you have somebody who's that much of a star, the wife kind of plays second fiddle to that person, particularly back then at the turn of the 20th century. Her position as a light-skinned black woman, there's a lot of negativity infused in the scholarship about her that's published during the 70s and the 80s. Gloria Hull's work, even though she was trying to champion her, was really very negative about Alice Dunbar. It was kind of surprising. And also her decision to not write in dialect, as was a particular popular mode of expression. But these factors, in combination with her open approach to religion and mysticism, made it easy for her to be dismissed. Upon a cursory reading of Violets, I discovered an essay about Jesus as the Buddhist prophet Aesop, an awareness that's definitely ahead of its time. And then there's a story about a bee that's granted a wish from a fairy and comes back as a bee baby. And then the fairy comes back later and finds out that the man has grown babies from nothing to be a man who's become a beekeeper. There you have fairies, reincarnation, in the natural world all rolled up into one rather short story, right? So she was really playing around with a lot of different things. And a lot of black people talking about fairies at that time. So in sonnet, the speaker is reminded of her love of wild violets and the season in which they bloom as it inspires her to think more deeply about heavenly and earthly love. That's the first poem on the handout. Sonnet. I had not thought of violets late, a wild, shy kind that spring beneath your feet in wistful April days when lovers meet and wander through the fields in raptures sweet. The thought of violets in florist shops and bows and pins and perfume papers fine and garish lights and mincing little box in cabarets and soaps and bending wines. So far from sweet real things my thoughts had strayed, I had forgot wild fields and clear brown streams. The perfect loveliness that God has made, wild violets shy in heaven, mounting dreams.
Cherise,
And now, unwittingly, you made me dream of violets in my soul's forgotten dream.
do you have more copies?
Huh?
Do you have more copies? And does
More
everyone
copies of the
already
handouts?
have
Jesse's got them.
I need one.
Who needs one? Annie needs one. The speaker moves from her own remembrances of girlish dreams, wild, shy, and materialistic desires, bows and pins and perfume papers, to an awareness that they have limitations, cabarets and deadening wines, leads her to an understanding that she has set her sights too low. Her awareness of violence literally grounds the speaker. At the turn, she says, so far from sweet, real things, my thoughts have strayed. I had forgot wild fields and clear brown streams. The speaker then says that this is indicative of the quote, perfect loveliness God has made. Then grounded, she reaches for the heavens, wild violets shy in heaven mounting dreams. As if it is a fantasy, she uses the word dreams several times. The speaker's desire for something greater than what man can offer can only be articulated as a dream or as a remembrance of her soul's forgotten gleam. At the end of the poem, what should be a GG couplet is replaced by an FFF rhyme, a triplet. The sonnet is not Petrarchan. If we are looking to see where spirit breaks the form, we might attribute this shift to a limitation of her creative talents, and it is not what I believe it to be, challenging the form by spirit. Into the Negro farmers of the United States, there is an even more religious appeal. God washes clean the souls and hearts of you, his favored ones, whose backs bend over the soil, which grudging gives them requited for toil, in sober graces in vision true. God places in your hands the power to do a service sweet, your gift supreme to foil the bare-fanged wolves of hunger and the moil of life's activities. Yet all too few your glorious band clean sprung from nature's heart, the hope of hungry thousands in whose breast dwells fear that you should fail. God placed no dart of war within your hands, but the power to start. Tears, praise, love, joy, enwoven in a crest, to crown you glorious, brave ones of the soil. Published in her Wilmington magazine, The Dunbar Speaker and Entertainer, this sonnet offers the insights of a speaker who envisions divine protection and guidance for the black farmers whose bodies, though broken by hard labor, are cleansed by God's love. The speaker sees these workers as gifted. God placed in your hands the powers to do a service sweet. Farming then is the Lord's work, something that benefits humanity and stands against evil. The speaker hopes they can understand their humble power. Even though they are not warriors on the battlefield, they fight on a different front at home, and possibly in the same land that their recent ancestors had been enslaved. Perhaps they are sharecroppers who are enslaved in a capitalist system. This is where the poem breaks down. While still a sonnet, it shifts from its Petrarchan beginnings in the octave to a sestet that does not fit the expectations for traditional variations of CDE, CDE, CC, DD, EE, etc. Instead, we have CB, CBC, CBDD. CBC, CDB. And while it sounds off, we expect a sound that rhymes with S or art. The word soil underscores the poem's original intent to praise those who are connected to the earth through farming. These reflections on Alice Dunbar Morris Nelson's work have piqued my interest into the larger body of her work, and I'm curious about gauging the degree to which her poetry has been ignored due to her unconventional approach to form and or her unorthodox approach to the mystical, spiritual, and or religious. I want to shift now to someone of a more canonical poet, King Toomer. In Cain, published in 1923, Toomer employs poetry, short fiction, and experimental drama as he chronicles his tenure as a school teacher in Sparta, Georgia, and his movement back to Washington, D.C. It is a commentary on the Great Migration, specifically at the first section can be interpreted as meditation on Black Southern cultural heritage, particularly what gets lost when Black people leave the site of slavery. In November Cotton Flower, the speaker attempts to capture the inexpressible beauty of this plant blooming late in season in the wake of the boll weevil epidemic, and in the octave, the speaker conveys the suffering that has emerged as the drought and the infestation combine to seriously challenge the farmers' ability to support themselves with this crop. Boll weevils come in the winter's cold, made cotton stalks look rusty, seasons old, and cotton, scarce as any southern snow, was vanishing. The branch, so pinched and slow, failed in its function as the autumn raged. Drought-finding soil caused the soil to take all water from the streams. Dead birds were found in wells 100 feet below the ground. We get the sense that the land is turning on itself, that death is prevalent, but in these couplets we also see a sense of tradition, of order, that these farmers will continue, as these couplets do, to move forward regardless. There is a feeling of stability, as one end rhyme reinforces the other, and the rhymes are simple: cold, old, snow, slow, rake, take, bound, ground. The tension in the poem lies in the simplicity of the end rhyme and the devastation that is exposed to in the body of the poem. At the turn, we see that there is hope. The season does not last forever. Such was the season when the flower bloomed. Old folks were startled, and it soon assumed significance. Superstition saw something it had never seen before. Brown eyes that loved without a trace of fear. Beauty so sudden for that time of year. And in the sestet, we see the shift at the end rhyme at line 11 saw before. In those same two lines, the speaker focuses on the impact of the cotton flower's appearance. It gives the farmers hope beyond even what they thought was possible. It soon assumed significance. Superstition saw something that it had never seen before. It's interesting to note, too, that the shift in line length and meter away from iambic pentameter, and it underscores the importance of the community's spiritual awareness, and the speaker is an outsider described in the poem as superstition. The Black community's connection to their own traditions, as seen in the couplets, inspires them to have hope for the future. Brown eyes that love without a trace of fear, beauty so sudden for that time of year. As a literature professor, I find reasons to teach Cain at the beginning because I love the way he wove the different forms together. Later, I realized that the beauty that I was drawn to in Cain had more to do with its abstract sense of Black folk spirituality. How the speaker wrestles with that heritage in Georgia and its legacy in the Northeast. Cain asks us to consider what is the function of folk spirituality and how we would describe the importance of that legacy in our own lives, even now. But for me, this means wrestling with form, not abandoning it, but definitely thinking about the ways that it must shift and change, and then break with expectations to enhance a poem's meaning. And I'll just end with reading from one of my own. And what I've done is it'll have, the poem will have like 4, I didn't give it to you. It'll have 10 beats in the line, and there's 14 lines, but I'll just read. Okay. Journey. How many pictures can one take of holes in trees between rocks? How many open spaces can one capture before deterioration or occupation? How many hiding places can one peer into, wondering what might return your gaze? When you return to this moment, don't think of a small creature who's lived there for years or days or months, who's slept and eaten, birthed there, because you need a portal to another dimension, an earthen door between this world and the one below, where spirit moves on a mission towards understanding your higher self, a greater sense of what you must learn. Peek anyway, sniff rich darkness, begin. And I'll close with this one, against consumption. Panther stands beside me, so dark, so black, you cannot see her, not even her eyes give her away, but she sees you, knows you want more than my blood or bones. The snack you seek is not sweet to the tongue. Oh, spirit senses that which is beyond flesh, that yearns for light, for love, for God's goodness. Please don't take another step. Don't reach beyond walls, don't bend time, space, expend energy just to take mine. Panther shows me how to bare my teeth, crouch down behind the wet rock, how to protect myself in every dimension. Panther and I are one, blended spirit. We pounce from boulders, leaping toward the heart. Thank you.
Introduce you. Oh, sorry.
Let me introduce Tara. Thank you. Tara Betts is the author of Break the Habit and Art and Hue. She is also one of the co-founders of Beijing of America, personal narratives about being a mixed race in the 21st century, and editor of the critical edition of Philippa Duke Schuyler's long out of print memoir, Adventures in Black and White. Tara has hosted talks with authors at Seminary Co-op Books and 57th Street Books. She's taught at Rutgers University, University of Illinois Chicago, and is part of the MFA faculty at Chicago State University. Welcome, Tara Betts.
Okay, let me make sure. I heard it cutting out, so I want to make sure I catch it. Typically,
I know, right? That's why I was like
I'm not even moving it. It's doing its own thing.
I know.
Thank you, everybody, for being here with us on Saturday afternoon, where you could be on a train or a plane and go home and have some variety in your pizza. Pizza was not bad. I'm just saying, it's cheese, pepperoni. I want some choices. So I'll talk a little bit. Typically, when I talk about form, I find myself usually talking about a book-length collection, because that's how I like to teach more often than not. I'll find like a poet who I think is really expanding that notion of trying to do a theme. Like last fall, I taught Evie Shockley's The New Black, because she was borrowing a lot from not just traditional forms you might expect, like a ghazal or a sonnet or something like that. She was also playing with a lot of stuff you would see from the Oulipo movement, or things like the mesostic, which when you're a little kid, everybody's probably done an acrostic poem, but the mesostic is in the middle. So then it's, just things that make you go, ooh. And then somehow she was able to weave these poems together to talk about this, these bigger ideas, like what does post-Blackness mean? Post-racial identity mean? What does it mean in particular in the Obama era? Like reading that book now, because it's been out for a few years, and looking at it and saying, oh, okay, I see how those themes are really important to recognize and document in a book. And then to braid that also with looking at her idea of Black womanhood and how do we mature into that and complicate that identity of Blackness through all these different forms. So I taught that book. I've taught a few different books like Aracelis Girmay's Teeth, Patricia Smith's Blood Dazzler, Natasha Tretheway's Native Guard, many for different themes, but still exploring that formal diversity in the poems. So I wanted to at least preface with that. There's a couple younger poets who I think really have done that in their first books. I was thinking of Nate Marshall's Wild Hundreds and Eve Ewing's Electric Arches, where she has this invented form of retellings, where the poem starts off as this text, and then the retelling is like a handwritten font that starts to depart from the narrative or tell what's really the story underneath the typeset text. So I think form is just getting more exciting, and I think it's also kind of taking on the voices of different people, and I think that's why panels like this are so important. But I wanted to focus more so on one form. Some of my participants in my workshop did this form, and it was the Golden Shovel. I read one the other night, so yay, Golden Shovel fans. So I wanted to talk a little bit about it, the origin of it. It's a really open-ended form. It doesn't require a meter. It doesn't require a set number of lines, but the number of lines is based on how long is the original line. How long is the original line for the end word you choose? So for example, what was it? The original one was by Terrence Hayes, and I think it got published in 2009. I first saw it on Poetry Daily, so it's too far back to check the Poetry Daily archives, but now it's on Poetry Foundation's website. I think they published it in there in 2017, on the website at least. And his is basically comprised of 2 sections. And both stanzas spell out the whole entirety of the poem, "We Real Cool," as the end words. So it's a pretty lengthy poem. You see how the first section sets you up for 1981, when the speaker is still a young boy and he's engaging with his father. But by 1991, in the second section, he starts to do this thing where it's more philosophical. And there's lots of hyphenations to provide those words, where he breaks the words almost like they're compound words. So it's a really interesting exploration of the structure. But after that poem became so popular, not just because of its just inherent beauty as a poem, but because of its tribute to Gwendolyn Brooks, which, if you know Real Cool, the first line really is the 7 pool players at the Golden Shovel. And if you've heard her read it, you know how she says players. So for me, seeing that was really exciting. And it eventually ended up in his 2010 collection, Lighthead, his 4th collection, which went on to win the 2010 National Book Award. So when you think about that poem and how that poem, "We Real Cool," has been around with us since 1960 from the Bean Eaters, it's really telling how important Gwendolyn Brooks' legacy is, how we can take these classic texts, these love texts, and create them into new forms. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how some of the critics have responded to that. I thought Dora Malek had a really good critical reading of it in Kenyon Review with her piece, The End of the Line, Terrence Hayes and Formal Innovation. But I thought it was really telling about how Brooks was so instrumental to the form when Don Scher said in February 2017, "The appeal of the form is straightforward and induces people of all ages to give it a try. Established poets, school children, and people who've never tried to write poetry before." So when I read that, I was like, as a child who grew up in Illinois, that's really kind of just fundamental to the mission of what Gwendolyn Brooks did as a poet, but also really speaks to the quality and the breadth of what happened when Peter Kahn, who's a high school teacher at Oak Park River Forest High School. If you know that high school, it's probably because Ernest Hemingway and Charles Simic went to this high school, which I think is a little interesting tidbit. But I do think because Peter was someone who is very immersed in teaching in communities, teaching in schools that aren't a part of higher education, it really became a compelling project for him because he saw how people opened up with this as a prompt. And when you read the book, you see there's not only some of the greats and some of the people who are widely anthologized now, some of them who are no longer with us. Who comes to mind immediately for me is a Philip Levine, Maxine Kuhlman, Jake Adam York, these poets who are really precious to me as a reader. And they, since Peter was working on this book, I think for a period of 7 years, he had that breadth of not just these people we really revere and trust, but also there's high school students in that book, which is not a really common, you're seeing it a little bit more, I think, if it's anthologies like The Breakbeat Poets, which is a hip hop themed anthology, stuff where they're trying to pull in younger readers. You see it a little bit more, but not in a book like this that focuses on a form. And I was really compelled. Claudia Rankin also did a review of 2 books since we're coming up, or rather we just passed Gwendolyn Brooks' 100th birthday. So part of that was there was just an influx of books. There was the Golden Shovel Anthology, Revise the Psalm, which was edited by Sandra Jackson Opoku and Quresh Ali Lansana. And there was a book of essays that Quresh worked on with Georgia Popoff called The Whiskey of Our Discontent. So there was a lot of scholarship and excitement around her centenary birthday. So Claudia went on to say in a review in 2017, when both the books came out, a Golden Shovel poem makes an existing poem into the end words of each line. That way, the new poem always remains in conversation with its precursor, right? With its precursor. And so when she's talking about that, again, it's not just this quality of a tribute that's compelling, it's how do we allude to the people that we admire and hold up as an example of what we want to do. So to me, that was really important as a reader as well. As far as the Golden Shovel Anthology, like I said, that came out in 2017. Its full title, The Golden Shovel Anthology, New Poems Honoring Gwendolyn Brooks, was edited by Peter Kahn, Ravi Shankar, and Patricia Smith. I love it too that it's not just that rigidity of just the N words. When you get towards the end of the book, there's the non-Brooks Golden Shovel section where people just started flipping different poets. So I think sometimes that's really exciting too. And Peter talks a little bit in the introduction about how his students started borrowing from other people that way, whether it was like Lady Gaga or Nicki Minaj or somebody else, and just turning that language on its ear in a way that they didn't expect. And the other section that's really exciting too is when you get to the end and they start flipping it in different ways. Like, can we do a reversal of the N words? Can we double, triple them? Can we change the way the white space is used in the poem? And create different types of stanzas in the section, variations and expansions on the form. If I had the whole book, I would show it to you, or at least share a couple of those. Unfortunately, I did not bring it with me. So I'm going to read a couple of the poems that are in the book, and I'm going to hand it over to Annie Finch, who is one of my formal inspirations. But I'll read a couple people, and Cherise is in the book too. So if you get a chance, check it out. I'm going to read these 2 short poems by other poets. So this one is called Stand Your Ground by Major Jackson. America, how often I have applauded your flagpoles. We, as citizens, struggle to find common ground, yet do much to damage the planks of your ark. Not a soft tune we make, glissando of the harmonized. We have a want problem, more of ourselves problem, us versus them in the great race to prosperity. In his introduction to metaphysics, Heidegger asks, why are there beings at all? We have, as guides, Klansmen and eugenicists, where the other is less. It is, I admit, the slapping of your ropes, tolling a perfect union, but is the measure of your worth a silent claim elsewhere? How is it a ripple runs through me when the wind rises? A cloth is nation, hauled down or half-mast, like a deferred dream, only earthly because we strive on a path hidden by dead leaves, a natural entity whose death makes valid its rebirth. That an angry man can shoot a teenager is par, as we say. We, iota, sigma, tau, deltas, new tribesmen in new codes, should in earnest put away our swords and talk shows. Think. Our watermelons have so many seeds, and we, galaxy in us, dissolve like lumps of wax. The mysteries we have, an unmitigated burning of sound and fury, not organism of one, but organs. America, I've had enough. So, and the N-words there, we do not want them to have less, but it is only natural that we should think we have not enough. So you can kind of see how when you read that line, sometimes it informs the idea that blossoms into the whole poem, which is exciting. I'll read a shorter one from Angela Narciso Torres, and she chose a line from the same poem, but much different outcome. It's in about 9 lines, 3 tercets, really short, and she chose even the leaves fall down in lovelier patterns here. Totally different line from the same poem. So this one's called September Chicago. There's a coolness, almost metallic in the air, even though the almanac says 11 days till fall, but the birch trees are impossibly green, and the only leaves turning are these blue-lined pages. Windblown, they fall, open to where I erased your name. I go down to the basement, unpack your letters, still bound in summer's heat. Was your script always lovelier under a bare bulb? Light bleeds patterns through ink and paper, spiral glyphs spelling, wait, still here, still here. So with that, I hope you will take an attempt to do a golden shovel. I find that students like it because they feel a little less threatened by all the constraints, and that's usually the first hurdle for them is being like, look, there are some rules, but you can play with this a little bit and the rules will work with you. So, thank you. You got everything? I don't want to sit on top of your notes.
I'm gonna just,
Oh, do you need the mic?
Can you hear me?
Here you go.
Yeah. Oh, all right. We'll try again with
Yeah,
this
we'll work
mic.
you out. We'll work you out.
We'll give this mic another shot. That's too much complication. I think we're good.
Mm-hmm.
Annie Finch's 20 books of poetry and poetics include poetry volumes Eve, Calendars, Among the Goddesses, and Spells, new and selected poems, all Wesleyan. She has also published dozens of books on poetics, including the anthologies A Formal Feeling Comes, An Exaltation of Forms, Measure for Measure, and Villanelle's The Books of the Poetics, The Ghost Meter and Afternoon Formalism, and the Poetry Writing Guide, Poet's Craft. Her poetry has appeared on stage at Carnegie Hall and in the Penguin Anthology of 20th Century American Poetry, recipient of the Sarvasky Poetry Award and the Robert Fitzgerald Award. She teaches in the low residency MFA program at St. Francis College in Brooklyn and lives in Washington, D.C. Welcome, Annie Finch.
Thank you. And because I wanted a short bio, I didn't list all the co-editors, but actually 3 of those anthologies do have co-editors, and Catherine Barnes is here, who's the co-editor of an exaltation of Formless. My remarks are called Metrical Liberation in African American Formalist Poetry. And I want to start just making some general comments and then narrow down specifically to what's on your handout. My debt to African American poetry in general as a poet is huge, and it's hard for me to talk about it in general without sounding reductionistic. But I will talk about it a little bit in general as a gesture of gratitude to this incredible tradition. If I had not been called by the magical heart and spirit of Ntozake Shange's choreo poems through a chance encounter in a bookstore, I would never have applied to the MA program at the University of Houston where Shange was teaching. And without her insightful, sensitive, and spirit-driven hands-on mentoring, I doubt that I would have gotten my inspired and tormented younger self out the other side of that program in one piece. My meetings with Audrey, Laurence, and Gwendolyn Brooks while I was a PhD candidate at Stanford stand out as two of the most important encounters of my poetic lifetime. Energy transmissions that showed me the strength a woman poet could assume in the world if she dedicated herself to her art and craft above all. And each of these poets on the page, Lord, Brooks, and Shange, modeled for me a coded spiritual and political density, a kind of nuclear fusion poetics, an approach to surviving in this world while honest that I have found in no other poets save perhaps Hart Crane. Meter and form in general are key to these poetics. Brooks's dense mistressry of line and stanza, as brilliantly unpacked by Celeste Dokes yesterday in her paper on Brooks' phenomenal poem, The Last Quatrain of the Ballad of Emmett Till, communicate through the pulse and shape of stanza simultaneously with the meaning of the words. Audrey Lorde is of course a free verse poet, but as my reading of her use of iambic pentameter and dactyls in my book The Ghost of Meter shows, she is a free verse poet who's engaged in meter at the cellular level. Lorde is part of the ongoing encoded wordless conversation in which poets who are urgently, necessarily engaged with poetic form participate. It's a conversation that goes on simultaneously with the publicly overheard conversation that happens in the meaning of the words. These poets communicated in me with rhythm, with form, with stanza, with the physical realities of the poetry on a much deeper level than I feel the meaning of words could ever do. So Lorde communicated with me in dactyls and about dactyls. Brooks communicated with me in trochees and about trochees. What a gift to me as a white poet, one whose white literary ancestry had been nearly entirely colonized by iambic pentameter, at least since Milton, to see these meters doing such powerful work for these amazing women poets. Where and how the tradition of these meters was kept alive within African American poetry over those centuries is open to speculation, as questions of influence tend to be. But I will venture that the 19th century poet Paul Laurence Dunbar, that master of metrical diversity, whose trochees and amphibrachs and anapaests and dactyls and dipotics flow like magic, had a very important role to play. Dunbar is truly a formal virtuoso. His poems suggest Thomas Hardy's in their sheer variety of shape and rhythm. His skill with meter makes many of the poems seem completely effortless, as if he was literally singing. I am so grateful for this transmission, whether it came to me through Brooks, through Lorde, or directly through my reading of Dunbar. It's been like an electric charge to my work. To try to scan the differences between Dunbar's meters can feel clumsy and inadequate, not just because the meters are too exact for the irregularities of his lines, as is the case with so many poets, but for the opposite reason. Meter can feel too clumsy to capture the precisely realized and exactly maintained nuances of each poem's metrical tune. It's not that the lines are are too loose to be metrical. It's that they're so precise that they're more precise than meter would be. One is reminded of the troubadours in 12th century France, who felt that it would insult a loved one to use a form that had been used before. When reading a poem as skillful as Dunbar, it's possible to imagine this actually happening, a completely new form for each poem. Dunbar is also, incidentally, truly entertaining to read. Like Langston Hughes, he writes accessible, self-contained lyrics peopled with interesting characters, shifting between a full range of moods with a public touch. But Dunbar's overall tone is much less urban. He's grounded in the slower ways of the country. So the composite effect of Dunbar's standard English poems, I'm not talking about his dialect poems today, controversial as those are, the composite effect of Dunbar's standard English poems might resemble Langston Hughes and Robert Frost rolled into one, except that the fanciful sensitivity and extreme sensuality of his language adds a strong flavor of Keats to the mix as well. A poet of great heart, Dunbar applies this metrical virtuosity to the most mundane subjects, glorifying the people and incidents of the daily life of African American culture of his time with reverence and beauty. Here's a stanza of one of his many populist poems on subjects concerned with what the title of one of his 6 volumes calls The Lowly Life. It's about the reveries of age, and the dipodic stanza is metrically brilliant. It's called When the Old Man Smokes, and this is just one stanza. For there's something almost sacred to the other family folks in those moods of silent dreaming when the old man smokes. So apparently so artless, so accessible, and yet if you look at the complexity of the meter there, it is a dipodic meter, meaning that it alternates stronger and weaker beats. For there's something almost sacred. The for and the all are stronger than the sum and the sake. For there's something almost sacred to the other family folks. So the two and the fam are stronger, right? To the other family folks. So it gives you that kind of seductive rocking. For there's something almost sacred to the other family folks, but yet he slows it down too. It could sound almost trite, but he slows it down. For there's something almost sacred to the other family folks. And then he really slows it down. In those moods of silent dreaming when the old man smokes. Then he totally breaks the dipodic rhythm when we get into old man smokes, but you still have 4 beats in the line. So he's keeping that rhythm of 4 beats, but he's giving you monosyllables like a spondee, but a 3-stress spondee. What's it called? Anybody remember? Tim, what's it called? Is Tim here? It's a spondee, but it has 3 stresses instead of 2. It's not a tribrac, that's 3 short ones. It's a No, it's just, no, I don't think it's a credit. It's got it's a molasses? Maybe it's a molasses. Anyway, whatever it is, it's old man smokes is what it is. For there's something almost sacred to the other family folks in those moods of silent dreaming when the old man smokes. So the way he just slows it down and he brings you right into that moment where you're watching the smoke rings rise. It's just so... The generosity of the way he uses meter, I find just stunning. Critics ignore the bulk of Dunbar's poetry for decades, ever since William Dean Howells declared that Dunbar's dialect poems were his best ones, his real strength. Howells said there was nothing especially notable in his standard verse. Can you believe it? We're talking about the poet who wrote, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, and We Wear the Mask. Howells said that there was nothing particularly notable in the verse except for the Negro face of the author. But, yeah. And yet the dialect poetry probably is one of the things that kept him alive, and now it's really only about a third of his work, and his other work is so stunning. I think someday it might be interesting for someone to do a real reading of his dialect poetry. Knowing him, I trust him, and I assume there's some stuff really worth reading there, but it's been kind of radioactive, understandably, since Howell's comment was kind of understood for what it was. But the real thing that changed was in 1993, Joanne Braxton published a collected edition of Dunbar's works. And when you see it all together is when you really understand. I still remember the day that I read that book, when I first took that book off my shelf and rediscovered Dunbar. I had read Dunbar before. I had 2 of his slim first editions in old books I'd gotten in a thrift shop. But it wasn't until I got that 1993 book, I put it on my shelf, and I still remember the day that I was like, okay, let me look at that again. I pulled it down and I started browsing with just excitement, increasing excitement through his gorgeously skillful, sensitive anapes, trochees, amphibacs, tribrachs, dipotics, dactyls, moving poems, vignettes, what a distinctive voice. And I had been looking for non-iambic poetry. I have this whole thing going, if you're aware of any of my critical work, one of my threads throughout has been metrical diversity, getting out from under the burden of iambic pentameter, which to so many people, iambic pentameter is the only meter that exists. And so I've been working on my own so often without models to write in other meters and to bring these other rhythms out. So it was such a trove for me. I've been reading clunky 19th century anapes by the fireside poets, John Greenleaf Whittier, and not to mention, not that Longfellow's a bad poet, he's a pretty good poet, but they just pale compared to Dunbar's adept musicality. He's really the master. And the day I picked that book off the shelf was a big day in my life as a poet. My landscape and my landmarks had changed forever. Forever, my landscape and my landmarks had changed. So Dunbar is a virtuoso, and I want to look a little bit at some of his poems on this handout. Does anyone have it? So, The Phantom Kiss, a wonderful dactylic poem that I won't go into every line of, but if you think about the dactylic poems available to us, I mean, we've got Longfellow's Evangeline, we've got maybe something by Edgar Allan Poe, we've got The Bridge of Sighs by Thomas Hood, which is pretty darn clumsy. They're 2 feet in each line. And then you get something like this, and it's just such a breath of fresh air. I would love to know what Dunbar's influences were and where he got this. I have another one, Tara.
No.
Okay, so if you just look at how he handles it, one night in my room, actually, I'm sorry, this is not even dactyls, this is the amphibolic one. One night in my room, still and beamless, with will and with thought in eclipse, I rested in sleep that was dreamless, when softly there fell on my lips the touch as of lips that were pressing mine own with the message of bliss, a sudden, soft, fleeting caressing, a breath like a maiden's first kiss. So you might think from those first 5 lines that these rocking amphibrachs were going to continue in a sort of bump, 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 bump way, like if you know my book of Poet's Craft, I've got the Samuel Woodruff's old oaken bucket in there. Oh, dear to my life are the dreams of my childhood, the old oaken bucket that hung by the well. It's kind of predictable. And, he gets us sort of going in a hypnotic way in the first stanza. But then the last 2 lines of the second stanza, look how he varies it. A sudden, soft, fleeting, caressing. So a sudden is a regular amphibrach, meaning that it's an unstressed, stressed, unstressed, stressed, unstressed, right? If you were in my workshop, I call them cups and wands. I call the unstress a cup, and the stress a wand. It's just more efficient. So cup, wand, cup, a sudden, but then soft, fleeting is really wand, wand, cup, right? Changing it, and that's this, and the softness of the 2 stresses next to each other, and then the way it falls off, and happens kind of quickly as you go into the next foot, and that's the fleeting moment. And then he brings it back with a single word, a polysyllabic word that includes the whole amphibrak, caressing. So there's a lot going on right here. A sudden, soft, fleeting, caressing. There's 3 amphibrachs in that line, right? And each one is handled completely differently. A sudden is 1 syllable and then a 2-syllable trochaic word. Soft, fleeting is a stressed foot followed by a trochaic word. And then caressing is 1 word that does it all. So just each of the three, a complete different handling of it, and the contrast is amazing. And then we go, a breath like a maiden's first kiss. Again, deceptively simple, but first kiss has two stresses next to each other, and it totally changes it. To have that, the opposite of soft fleeting in's first kiss, where the soft fleeting you have stress, stress, unstress, here you have unstress, stress, stress. So he's just really playing with us and playing with the meter. And if you read this aloud, I think you'll find yourself captivated, even though you might not have to know what's going on, you might not have to scan it, but he'll be doing this amazing physical number on you, so to speak. So looking at mortality, this is an example of Dunbar and the dactyls, a beautiful dactylic poem. And Cherise pointed out that some of these poems are much more mystical and magical than the Dunbar she read before. And I think that when he does get into these meters like the dactyls and the trochees, he allows his more mystical side to come out, which I find that enchanting. So, no answer on the land with ashes to ashes, dust into dust. I think this is probably of someone who's been convicted of a crime and put to death. And just the beauty of giving this person the dignity of death and allowing him to join the mystery of death in spite of whatever he might have done or been falsely accused of doing in his lifetime. It's a very healing poem, I think. Earth, the great mother, has called him again. Deeply he sleeps, the world's verdict defied. Shall he be tried again? Shall he go free? Who shall the court convene? Where shall it be? No answer on the land, none from the sea. Only we know that he did as he did, we must. Only we know that as he did, we must. You with your theories, you with your trust. Ashes to ashes, dust into dust. So much to admire here, and I'd just like to point out two really interesting metrical moments, because with Dunbar, every syllable counts, nothing is wasted. I wanted to point out, no answer on the land, none from the sea. He forces you to pronounce that on in an unusual way, right? No answer on the land, none from the sea, because you're in the dactylic swing of it. So you have to stress that on. Why would he do that? Why would he make us stress the on? I think he's really it's his way of not giving priority to the land over the sea. No answer on the land, no answer off the land, he seems to be saying. And it's kind of like giving the equivalence to the mystery of what happens in the sea and the solidity of what happens on the land, and they're balanced, they're given equal weight somehow by forcing us to stress that on. A subtle thing, but with many, many layers of meaning behind it. I also love the way, the next line, he makes us stress the he. Only we know that as he did, we must. And that stressing of the he gives some really beautiful power to this person who, in my reading, has been probably killed for a crime he didn't commit, and there may have likely been racism involved in the verdict. And just to give that he, that dignity of that extra stress and that respect is, I find really moving. It could go on. Song has wonderful dactylic rhythms, but I will leave Dunbar now, and I'll just talk for a moment about the trochee in later centuries. And I do feel that Dunbar's metrical example may have been one of the reasons I've written about before, about the importance of the trochee to African American poetry. That if you look at Africa by County Cullen, if you look at Gwendolyn Brooks' Aniad, I don't think it's a coincidence that these two major African American poems, epic poems really, though Africa is shorter than the Aniad, but that they're both in trochees. And I've often noticed that the trochee has such a powerful force. And I don't think it's just that it's the opposite of the I am, and if you consider the I am the superego or the sort of white meat, and then this is a way of being the opposite, I don't think it's necessarily that reactive. I think that it could be the influence of Dunbar and the influence of these non-I am beginners at play, just carrying through that poetic tradition. And If We Must Die, this famous sonnet, I have done a reading of this elsewhere. I won't go into great detail, but you'll just notice that starting around line 9, just when the sonnet turns, the trochaic power of the poem comes to the fore. O kinsman, we must meet the common foe. And this poem, of course, by the way, if you don't know the story, was circulated among prisoners in jail. I don't remember exactly the years. Anybody remember? There's
Which prison?
It was the people who'd been jailed after a riot, like
Attica?
no, it was I think Rosa. It's all in the essay in Afternoon Formless. If anybody has a copy of that, I can't quite remember. But Abby Rich tells the story really well. But the upshot is that the prisoners used to pass this poem around secretly. These were African American prisoners who'd been in prison for political reasons, for political rebellion. And this really helped to uplift the spirits and unite these people during a very difficult time in the early civil rights movement. So yeah, it's an inspiring poem, and I think that it's the power of the trochee coming through at the end, pressed to the wall, dying but fighting back, which kind of carries through and brings out the trochaic force in the whole second part of the sonnet. That gives it that extra power. And here's a little bit of Gwendolyn Brooks' Ennead, again, magnificent tour de force of trochaic poetry. And finally, June Jordan's Something Like a Sonnet for Phyllis America Wheatley. How wonderful that she used the dactylic meter to write a sonnet in honor of Wheatley, who of course was known for writing, I think, a pentameter heroic couplets. But she's kind of reclaiming Wheatley as a true African American poet here by sort of blessing her, I feel, with the dactyls, and just acknowledging how her verse sweetens the veil of the race. So I just want to have a shout out to Dunbar and all his amazing influences, which continue, and I'm grateful to say continue in my work as well. Thank you.
So now we'll open up the floor for questions. If anyone has anything that they want to ask. Okay.
Jason.
Can you speak a little bit louder?
Are there any young African American poets that you would suggest who are currently writing in traditional forms? I mean, I know like Eric Dawson. But
Yeah.
maybe I know there's a lot of slam poets and stuff like Mahogany Brown and people like that. But I wonder if there's any other young or just contemporary African American women that's writing in traditional forms like
I would say what Patricia and we were just talking about her at lunch.
Allison Joseph.
Allison Joseph, definitely, and
Amanda Johnson.
Amanda Johnson, definitely,
Mm-hmm.
writing in forms, traditional forms.
Yeah.
Marilyn
Yeah,
Nelson,
I was about
definitely.
to say
She's
her
not
too.
younger anymore though, but Marilyn Nelson, one of the
I'm
greatest.
thinking, and Jason and I talked earlier, so I'm thinking, if you're thinking younger, like 30s, 20s, right? 30s, 20s bracket.
Maybe like first couple books or something.
First book people, yeah. Yeah, Nate Marshall's book, definitely. he experiments with a variety of forms and meters in Wild Hundreds, and it's beautiful. Um, I'm trying to think. Jericho. I think he has a sonnet or two. Jericho Brown and Please. I think New Testament. Is his book Metrical in Testament? New Testament?
Yes.
Yeah.
Natasha, do we say Natasha?
I said Natasha's Native Guard, but she's done form throughout her body of work. Natasha Treadway. I mentioned Evie Shockley's The New Black earlier. That book has all kinds of forms across the board. But even if you look at her chapbooks, like the Gorgon Goddess and the one she did with Belladonna, or you look at, what's the other two? A Half Red Sea, and her new book, Ricochet, which was shortlisted for the Pulitzer. She's constantly playing with these forms or reinventing old forms. So I think she's, as far as newer poets, I think she's doing a lot to bring that to the forefront.
And Tyen Majest, who
Yes.
just won
Yes.
the Pulitzer Prize for Olio, which is a tour de force.
Yeah.
He's got like sonnets on top of sonnets and villanelles connecting with villanelles and inventing all his own forms.
And
you
it's
can
so
read them any
visual,
old way.
too.
It's
It's a
remarkable.
super visual book.
Yeah, very visual.
That book like folds out.
Mm-hmm.
It's huge,
Yeah.
Yeah.
It does. It does fold out into a huge thing. Yeah, it's really, it is amazing. It's an amazing publishing feat. It's an amazing vision. It
Yeah.
just had when he put that book together.
Yeah.
Definitely.
I know I saw that Annie had it on her notes, and I was like, damn, I didn't even mention it. But I did, I kind of co-facilitated an appearance he did in Chicago where we were supposed to do an interview at a Chicago Public Library. And it turned out the only people who came was a bunch of kids who were there for an after-school program.
Oh no.
And we used to teach together, so it was so hilarious. We're like, what are we gonna do? We were gonna do like a heady intellectual conversation about this book and the history and the forms in it. And there's a bunch of middle school kids here. And all we did is he ended up, like he had a lot of poems in there that were based on photographs too. And because the book is so highly visual and there were those photographs and he could tell them the stories behind the photographs, there was a row of middle school kids sitting with me and looking at him, and they're like flipping through the book. How did he do that? That looks really cool. So maybe not understanding all the content or able to look at all the mature, really adult themes that kind of come in the latter half of the book, but just to be able to engage young people in a whole new way with a text that's really challenging was exciting. So I think that's important to think about when we write in form too. It's like, how can we make it something that brings people in instead of alienates them? And I think because African Americans have this sensibility more often than not that we need to engage as many people as we can. Engage as many people as we can. We consider that, and that's a powerful thing, So.
Great.
Another question?
Nobody?
Any questions, panelists, for each other? I was curious about you were talking in Kara about the different variations in the golden shovel.
Mm-hmm.
And when people take it and do it, like maybe write a golden shovel in response to a song lyric,
Mm-hmm.
does it seem like the poems, how are the poems like different, or have you tried to do it? Have you written in response to?
At this point I've written several, but because I just feel so wedded to Gwendolyn Brooks as part of my canonical influence, I haven't really broken from that yet. But when other people do it, I get excited. I'm like, oh snap, this could do this. But I do think it can shift the tone in the poems because some words are just not words that other people would use, particularly if you look at somebody like Gwendolyn Brooks and how her turns of phrase, her diction is just so unique in certain lines that you think, oh, yeah. As opposed to, like I mentioned earlier, students have written Lady Gaga ones. Lyrics from Telephone are not going to be the same. But I think it can also generate new subject matter or things that speak to another audience.
Yeah.
So it's important.
Right. Annie, we were thinking about the kind of the legacy of metrical variation or metrical shifts. And you think about somebody like Pollard, Dunbar, who struggled so, right? I mean, that is to have that the sort of racist power structure in critics and all saying what they were saying, and then sort of boxing it in and saying, okay, we're really only going to publish and really think it's interesting. We write about dialect, writing dialect. When you look at the non-dialect poems, do you have a sense that, aside from the ones that are sort of the greatest hits like Sympathy and those kinds, do you have a sense that there's a broad readership now that would be interested in going back to something like Joanne Braxton's collected Dunbar, or like an interest in essays about Dunbar, or there hasn't really been that much scholarship either about either of the Dunbars.
Mm-hmm.
That is very true. There hasn't been much scholarship, and I think it's been. I think he's suffered from the same part of the same problem that Wheatley suffered from. That that his formal virtuosity and skill counted against him, and actually maybe one of the same reasons that even Brooks doesn't get the kind of close reading that she should. Based on like what we heard yesterday. Her work really, really deserves and rewards it. But I think things are changing. I have one brilliant young student I taught at Stone Coast, Josh Davis, who's doing a dissertation now at Ohio University, and he's writing about Dunbar. And Josh has the formal understanding to be able to see what he's up to. And I think that's one of the main issues, is that people just haven't been literate in meter enough to appreciate what poets like Dunbar have been doing. But that's coming back now. We now have 2 poetry conferences devoted to form, and there's a lot more interest. And I think especially there's a lot of interest in African American poets now. A lot of the younger poets coming out of Kelly Conn are writing in form, and I hear that there might even be an anthology of African American formalist poetry in the works. Maybe Tara's editing that, maybe. So, it's been coming for a while now, but I think the pieces that need to be in place are that people have to be literate enough in form to be able to appreciate, and then also maybe, comfortable enough culturally to be able to widen the lens of what counts as authentically African American. I think that's happening. We see Wheatley coming back, and I think the time is ripe. I think it would be excellent for someone to do serious work on Dunbar. We'd love to see him. I think he's a major poet. I mean, one of the major, frankly, I don't think that much of it anymore. Sorry, everybody. But I would say, if you're going to go ranking people, Dickinson and Dunbar might be the major poets of the 19th century for real.
Thank you. Well, if there are no more questions, I would like to thank the panelists. Thank you, Tara. Thank you, Annie. Thank you all.